Hello, hello, hello. It is Talk to Me with Eugene Williams Jr., and I always bring you a great guest. Tonight, once again, is no exception. Let me tell you how this came to pass. See, I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And in me knowing a lot of people and forming relationships, I know people who know people. A few weeks ago, I was talking to an old friend of mine, Pam Perry, a publicist named Pam Perry. And I was telling her about my show and what I'm trying to do. And she said, Eugene, I know you are a former educator, administrator, all of that. I have a man who you would vibe with immediately because many of your experiences are the same.
Yeah.
And after I read about this man, he is clearly a man after my own heart.
Wonderful.
Let me tell you a little bit about him. First of all, he is an educator, an author, a speaker, a professional development guru, an administrator, a classroom management consultant with 25 years of experience in public education. He is nationally known as the student engagement agent. And he brings FIRE, fire, to the classroom.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
This is going to be exciting. He has recently written a book called Contagious Teaching, Creating an Environment Where Kids Can't Get Enough. I'm so excited as a former principal myself, as a former teacher myself, as a veteran of 27 years in public education myself. I'm so excited to have this man with me today. Let's do like we always do. Let's put our hands together and give it all up. Give him a Don Cornelius Soul Train welcome from Mr. Stephen Boyd, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Eugene. And thank you for the invitation to be on your show. I'm excited.
Well, Stephen, I'm excited too. And like I said, when I talked to Pam and she told me who you were and what you were doing, I said, it's a no-brainer. It's got to be done. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, it's a question I ask all my guests, but I want to hear your perspective on it. You're an educator. You are a professional development guru, a speaker, a writer, an author. Who were your earliest inspirations as an educator? If I have to talk to a younger Stephen Boyd, who would he tell me were the people that inspired him to become who he is right now?
Well, first, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this platform. It's such a wonderful platform to talk to another educator like yourself. I would start first with my family because my mother was in education as a nurse. And then I would say one of my aunts who was very well traveled all over the country as a writer, as an editor with the United Methodist Church. And her spin on education and the value of reading and education had a profound effect on me. But as a musician, now I need you to know that I'm a musician. So I went to school for music education.
Okay.
And actually, it was not my goal to actually become a music teacher. I wanted to be a professional musician, travel over the world, sing. I wanted to speak, but I wanted to be on the stage, if you will.
Right.
So initially, the inspiration for education, now when it was really came from them, but that wasn't really the slant. But I began to develop a love for teaching and education through the chair of our music department at the HBCU, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Go Hawks, Dr. Gerald Johnson, who was a very astute and very, very, very polished man. To be a Black man, to be very polished like he was, it really left an indelible impression upon me in the way he dressed, the way he walked, the way he carried himself. And at that time, Dr. John Lampkin, who was the concert band director, and then Dr. Sheila Harleston, who was the choir director and piano teacher. I think the amalgamation of all of those family experiences and all those experiences that I had at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore really caused me to embrace education in the first couple of years, although that wasn't my plan. And we all know that old adage that says, if you ever want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I'm sure I cracked a lot of jokes when it came to that. But I really began to discover that as I really committed to the craft of education and started to learn strategies and other things, I really started to enjoy teaching children how to appreciate music. And of course, there's the engagement piece of the classroom, which as time had gone on, I learned all these fun little mechanics of engaging students in a fun way to get them to learn at high levels. And so those were my early inspirations for education.
You know, I love hearing that story because the educators I talked to, and I've talked to several on this. Well, first of all, as it turns out, no matter what field my guests are from, or what professional field they're in, they all end up having some form of education or becoming an educator at some point in their pivot or in their career.
Yeah.
And so when I hear things like, I didn't really intend to become this, I can identify because education was something that I stumbled into as well.
Yeah.
But I really want to get into the whole idea of classroom engagement, because that's a big thing for teachers right now. You go on social media and you see teachers and principals and parents and folks just kind of just railing on and on about all that's quote unquote wrong with public education.
Yeah.
And very few people talking about what's right with public education. And so I saw some of your topics that you speak on, and it got me excited. And I want you to talk to me a little bit about them. For example, the one that really caught my eye was the first one. If you can't manage them, you can't measure them.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. But give me your take on that point.
Well, here's the thing. Standardized testing has been the mainstay of public education for nearly 40 years. People want to know, if we're going to invest millions of dollars in public education, then we need to have a standard of measurement and accountability to know whether that investment has been good or whether it's not been great. The problem is, the focus on standardized testing, which I understand, really needs to reroute the money towards providing teachers with an understanding of how behavior works, how to connect with students on a social, emotional level, and how that transfer of the social emotional level is a journey towards the logical understanding that you're attempting to communicate through your content. So if we want to see standardized testing improve, then we have to really focus on the behavior that needs to be controlled, the behavior that needs a sense of a pattern, if you will. Now, in a perfect world, if we had two parents and both parents, had adequate income, and you came from the kind of value system that probably you came from, I came from, where if you got in trouble at school and before they took corporate punishment out of that, if you got a paddling at school, you get a paddling at home, and that curved your behavior. That didn't mean that the teacher still could not have management skills and strategies, but that just speaks to the partnership between the school and the home to curve behavior, if you will. Now that is kind of somewhat dissipated, unfortunately, with the influence of the home and the influence of the school not working together in tandem, it has put more pressure on teachers to be able to kind of have the skills that they need to be able to manage classrooms. The problem is, if I don't have the management skills, but you still expect me to measure at a high level, something's got to give. So if you can't really adequately manage them, there's no measuring rule for me. Number one, I won't be able to tell what their aptitude is. And you can't really tell what I can do as a teacher, whether I'm teaching something right or wrong, what it needs to be adjusted, what I can do in terms of a strategy. But until we get the management right, then we can fix the other things that needs to happen. So when I talk about when you can't manage them, you can't measure them, we're really talking about helping teachers with the strategies they need to be so profoundly positive in the classroom till it's like, okay, now we can have a different conversation about instruction, about strategies, about pacing guides, about the curriculum, because you've got the temperature in the room right. Now the students can learn at a high level.
I love that point, because what I'm hearing from you, in a nutshell, I like to condense things down.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you is successful classroom experiences for teachers and students have to boil down to two things, and tell me if I'm wrong. Basically, relationships and structure.
Relationships and structure.
And if you can maintain a positive relationship while maintaining that structure, generally, it's been my experience, I'm sure it's been yours, that you have better engagement, you have higher forms of learning, all those good things that we want in the classroom. So I'm excited about that. Now, Another thing that you speak about made me laugh because I know it to be true. When I was an educator, the two types of kids I had the most quote unquote trouble with were the ones who were so far advanced in terms of what I was teaching, they were bored with it, or the ones who were so far behind in terms of what I was teaching, they were embarrassed to let people know what they didn't know. So it's easier to cut the fool and act the clown than to behave in class.
Yep.
So when I see this particular topic, I'm not bad, I'm just bored. Talk to me about that.
Well, your experience is very much similar to mine. I was inspired by a book that really talked about, the student being bored in class. And it was a book of strategies. Author who escapes him right now just put together a book of lots of different hands-on strategies and thinking strategies and movement strategies as a workbook to help teachers get the class moving to increase the intellectual stimulation. And that book really led me into a lot of research that year to begin to put together this training to communicate to teachers that the students that you're classifying as bad are not really bad. And as you said, when you talk about those students that were in GATE or AP and the ones that could excel, that the academic rigor was not rigorous enough, that led them into mischievous behavior, or the ones that do what's called avoidance of failure behavior, and as a result of not wanting to demonstrate the fact that they had some deficits, they led them into mischievous behavior. But when we learn how to engage in a highway, then what happens is there's a sense of ownership in the learning process because I'm engaging through games, or I'm engaging through movement, or I'm engaging through tactile learning, all those different levels that the brain needs to really cement the content that you're trying to communicate. So again, the student is not really bad. That boredom is leading to mischievous behavior. And so when I do that training, there's lots of little videos that show that. There's one video that we like to show that really talks about what happens to brain stimulation when there is no boredom. And it's really funny. There's a gentleman that actually was willing to almost do something harmful to himself just to stimulate his brain when nobody's talking to him. He's in this room by himself. And the need for stimulation is so strong. They told him, he said, you can either just sit here quietly or you can hit this button that's going to shock you. And within like 1 minute, he's hitting the button to shock himself just because he wants that stimulation. And so the same thing happens with kids.
Absolutely. Also, one of the big things we talk about in education is, especially when we get to a certain stage in our careers, we have to constantly reevaluate. And some people get mad about it because they think the term is corny, but it's important in our evaluations as educators, our self-evaluations as educators. The whole idea of what is our why, okay? And so, everybody has a different why. I think in general, all the whys are kind of narrowed down to a few of the same principles, but everybody comes to it for a different reason. I came into education because it was very important to me to make sure that African-American males have those positive role models and have those same opportunities for AP classes and honors classes as their white contemporaries. But other people's whys are different. You have a speech that you do called The Bigger Why.
Yeah.
Take me into that. Where do we go with the bigger why when you talk?
That speech was really inspired by, actually, there's a book that I'm reading right now called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. It's right here on my desk. And one of the parts of his framework that talks about the infinite game is called a just cause. And he shares a story about a Hungarian man who before the First World War, it's not an anthropologist, but he was collecting seeds, and his big why as to why he was collecting seeds is, I wanted to collect all the seeds of all the plants and all the food from all over the world so that no child would go hungry. The interesting thing was that he did this prior to the Russian occupation under Stalin, and his interns and people that worked for him were so committed to just creating this seed laboratory till they would stuff seeds in their pockets. They would stuff seeds in different hidden locations. And of course, when Stalin was overthrown, and then he talks about how Hitler had learned about it. Hitler had sent, different soldiers and stuff to try to find them, and even put him in jail to get him to tell them where all this laboratory was, where all these people were. I mean, and people were so committed to the bigger why, the bigger just cause. So what we're attempting to communicate to administrators and understanding that bigger why is, how do you communicate the bigger just cause to your staff and your students to get them to buy into the bigger vision? So it's really all about, it's a leadership training and a leadership experience and coaching to help superintendents or help principals to get them not just to tell us why, but how do you, what I call the follow through principle, think about follow through in basketball and follow through in baseball and, follow through in golf. How do you get them to buy into the bigger vision? The infinite game where really what Simon Sinek talks about is we're just doing the right thing because the right thing is the right thing to do. And so getting your staff on board to that bigger why, to commit not to just their own personal agenda, but the reason why I do it is because I'm collecting seeds so no other child becomes hungry. I'm doing this so that nobody else goes to school without a coat. The bigger why. Why is the bigger why? Why am I educating? I'm educating and giving these children the thinking skills so they can go out and become millionaires. They can go out and make a difference in the world, not just so they can learn math, not so they can just learn English. I'm learning English because there's a bigger why as to why I need to be eloquent in my speech. When you can get the staff on board with that bigger vision, then now we have a troop, we have an army of teachers that are walking in, making a difference, not just because I got to have lesson plans, but because these lesson plans are the seeds that I'm planting for a bigger future.
I love it. I love it. I love that message. And right now we need that more than ever. So your book is called Contagious Teaching.
Yes, sir.
Creating an environment where kids can't get enough.
Our subtitle has actually changed to Transforming Classrooms from Outrageous to Outstanding.
I love it. I stand corrected. Transforming classrooms from outrageous to outstanding. Even better.
We're just changing that tagline there.
Even better. So contagious teaching. What is it? How do we catch it? How do we avoid getting sick from it? Is there a cure for it? Like, no, I'm joking, but I'm serious because it has to be that type of commitment. It has to be something that catches, quote unquote, fire, like you talk about in some of your other writings. But talking about the contagiousness of teaching and all those things you talked about in terms of creating a better future for our young people.
Well, it was birthed out of asking this question: what is the secret sauce of a master teacher? So when we kind of delve into some research, it wasn't really about looking at videos for us. What we really felt like we needed to do was start with the evaluation and observation models, because the observation and evaluation models are a picture of what master teaching is supposed to look like, to be quite honest. So no matter whether it was Texas so what we started to do is just kind of do is compare and contrast and seeing what does Californian model, what is the Texas model. And what we found was that there were more similarities than differences. And what we wanted to be able to do, since creating trainings is kind of one of our mainstay and then kind of putting in the content from there, is we wanted to synthesize a blueprint that would communicate to teachers a very simple way, as if we could give them a secret sauce in a very few words and a framework to understand what would it be. And so when we started comparing and contrasting these different observation and evaluation models, we found that there was more similarities than differences. The language might be different compared to California to Texas, but the outcome was the same. And so Contagious teaching is kind of like this secret formula that we are spreading to kind of get back with that we want you to do these specific things that we found that is consistent all across the country, that if you're consistent with these 4 things, then your students will be contagious to you. They'll get allergic to you. Other staff members will get allergic to you. You become this master teacher. So what we came up with is 4 C's that were our secret formula. The first one is connection. So that goes back to relationships. So in all 50 states, all those models had something specific about relationships. Then the second thing we noticed was that the next thing we call that content. So these are the 4 C's, context rather. So all the models seem to have some type of ask about how well does the teacher understand the context of the student in front of them, but then how well do they extrapolate the context and use it in their content. That's really the part that really excited us. And so that really gets into understanding teachers about marketing and, how to sell to customers and all those kind of things. The next C had to do with the explicit instruction. So we called that content. We just kept that really simple. But what we focused on was that really strong teachers don't try to teach verbally like over a large period of time. So what we call the quantity of time, what we noticed is that the really strong teachers actually focused on less content that focused specifically on exactly what students needed to know and be able to do, and actually did less examples versus lots of examples. So you and I are from the generation where we had homework and you did all the odd problems at the back of the book, right?
Yes.
So it was just kind of like, just busy work. But the truth of the matter is, what value did that busy work really give us in terms of improving our understanding of the math, or improving the understanding of the English, or how we're supposed to synthesize the essay? So what we noticed with the content piece, when it came to explicit instruction, most teachers do I do, we do, you do. But what we really focused on was not only doing I do, we do, you do, but increasing formative assessment for learning, not assessment of learning. And then how much are you increasing the engagement in between those? And then thirdly, are you doing that in a way that teaches first the basic concept, a little bit more moderate concept, and then what does the concept look like at its most complex form? And then finally, focusing much more on differentiation. So what we're saying is teach less, differentiate more, and increase formative assessment more frequently. That's what the content piece is all about. And then finally, the containment is the 4th C that really focus on making the student engagement much more consistent. And what we like to say, the containment part is actually I'm not bad, I'm just bored 2.0. So we repurposed a little bit of I'm not bad, I'm just bored, put this in contagious teaching, but we wanted to focus a little bit more on this concept of teaching teachers that the brain is like a container. And when you're much more consistent with student engagement, that students, especially in your middle grades and high schools, can contain the learning better and faster when you're much more consistent with your engagement. So that secret sauce, if you will, that antidote of contagious teaching really has to do with when you do these specific things consistently, you become that master teacher. You become that teacher that students just flock to your classroom. And it's interesting because I have a long-term sub at one of the schools that's in my zone that is really kind of getting her life together and is noticing that the students are really gravitating to her and that the students are really connecting with her compared to some of the other veteran teachers that have been there and they complain about the kids. And so when she's asking me about advice, these are some of the things I'm telling her, the things I'm sharing with you in terms of our research. I'm saying to you, hey, focus on this, focus on that, build those relationships, be there and take these notes, all right, and do all these kind of things. And you, before you know it, you'll be the teacher that the students just want to learn everything from your hand because you have the right things that you're putting in place each and every day.
You know, I don't know if you would agree with this, but what I'm finding is that a lot of times as teachers, we have a tough time evolving with the times. And by that, I mean this.
Yeah.
So it is now more important than ever for your students to have some sort of, I won't necessarily say affection for you, but some sort of respect for you, admiration for you, like for you, whatever you want to call it. Now, when you and I were going to school, the teachers really didn't care whether we liked them or not, or whether how interested we were in each other's lives or all those things. But that was a different time. Nowadays, and we know the old saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing, especially now in this particular era. I want to come to the whole concept, though, of classrooms on fire. I love your acronym, FIRE, classrooms on fire. What does it look like when a classroom is on FIRE, fire?
Well, the FIRE is an acronym. First, there is talking about focus. There is the focus of the teacher. All right. John Maxwell always says, if you aim at nothing, you're bound to hit it every time. So I talk to teachers about the fact that there must not just be an instructional focus, but that focus or vision for your classroom. What are you trying to create in terms of that focus? So I talk about focus in that speech. And then the I has to do with innovation. And in the innovation, I actually talk about this Chinese term that we were all going through the pandemic, many of us trying to learn how to pivot. I was in a couple of executive C-suite kinds of trainings, and one trainer and speaker was talking about a Chinese term called Wei Zhuzhen. And the word Wei Zhuzhen meant that where there's tragedy or there's kind of chaos, there's also opportunity. And so in terms of innovation, I talked about how a lot of innovations in the world have come out of tragedy, have come out of chaos, have come out of people not having a need, but creating a need as a result of that. And so I talk about that innovation, that a classroom on fire really is innovative in the sense that they teach how students how to find creativity and opportunity. The R is for relational capital, and that really has to talk about increasing, the investment of relationships in the students. And the E is really called about empowering message. And I really talk about a tagline for your classroom each and every day. What is it that you need to say to your students each and every day, that as soon as they walk in there, it's almost like your mama always said, oh, I know, I got to eat my vegetables, right? What is it that you said that's so positive every day that the students just know that when they come in and when they leave, you're going to have this tagline, in terms of that. So we talk about catching fire. We're talking about the students, the teacher having a language, a feel, a vibe that really empowers that classroom, empowers them, that not just impacts the classroom, but it impacts the school altogether as well.
The thing about great people is when you talk to them, the time flies by very, very quickly. We could probably do 2 more of these shows, and we may come back. I may have you back again, Mr. Boyd.
Well, thank you. I'll be glad to. I'll be very happy to.
But I just want to say something to people. Mm-hmm. If you are a parent, if you are an educator, if you are a principal, if you are a superintendent, a lot of what you've heard today are not only very important things to know and to implement into your everyday instruction, but a lot of these principles are time honored. Mm-hmm. 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 They worked 50 years ago. They work today. They'll work even down the line when we have George Jetson AI robot teachers teaching our kids. I hope we know.
That's right. Yeah.
But they'll even go at that point at some point. But people need to hear more about you and what you're doing. So if people want to see you on the internet or want to find out more about you, want to contact you, want you to have you come to their districts and speak, how do they get in touch with you, sir? How do they do that?
Absolutely. They can go to my website at www.iamstephenboyd.com. You can find me on social media at I am Stephen Boyd. That's capital I am Stephen Boyd, both on Facebook and on Instagram. Go to my YouTube channel, which is I Am the Engagement Agent, and you'll see a lot of my videos, my interviews. This interview will also be on those as well when you have an opportunity to do that. I would love to be able to engage with you. And Eugene, let me say something to you that really kind of stuck with me when you were talking about the difference between our generation going to school and the relationships there versus the one. And this is the way I would synthesize that message. We came from environments of love, so we didn't go to school to be loved because we have
Amen.
love. We had love at home. So
Correct.
students that come from environments, I'll say it this way, students that come from environments of love go to school to learn. Students that don't come from environments of love go to school to be loved. And that's the biggest difference between this generation and our generation. The best teachers, the contagious teachers, are the ones that are committed to finding that balance between the learning and the loving, so that students invariably will encapsulate that and become productive adults. I wanted to say that because you kind of touched on that, and that came to my heart and my mind. I wanted to share that.
Stephen, we are in sync on so many issues. When I'm hearing you talk, I feel like we are vibing on so many different ways, because you made me think of the fact that before I left education, so my last 5 years in education as a high school principal, and I would make morning announcements. And you talk so much about love. You talk about love and relationships, and the kids will tell you the everyday tagline on every morning announcement was, "Mr. Williams loves you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it." And even though the kids used to laugh at me in the hallway and say, "Mr. Williams, that's so corny," what was so funny was my last graduation I presided over, I ended by saying, as always, and they repeated, "Mr. Williams loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it." And so parents, teachers, folks, you don't know how you will impact these kids. And the things that they laugh at you about, or say are corny, or say are old-fashioned, they need those things too. They just want to know that you love them, that you care about them. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a great discussion with Mr. Stephen Boyd.
Thank you.
Okay, and he is doing great things throughout this nation. And if you are a principal, if you are a teacher, if you are a school district leader, get this man in front of your folks to talk. We need it now more than ever. This has been Talk to Me with Eugene Williams Jr., and I've been talking with the fantastic Mr. Stephen Boyd. Have a fantastic evening and be blessed.
Thank you.